Hello, everyone. We're going to wait for a minute, and we should start in a couple of minutes here, 1 minute or two.
All right.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today at this event and the launch of this important new report, Under the Radar: Corruption's Role in Fueling Arms Diversion. My name is Sara Marten Naval, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. We are here to explore a critical but still understudied issue: the role of the corruption plays in enabling arms diversion. I'm gonna start by setting the scene. In recent years, states have increasingly recognized the need to prevent the diversion of weapons to criminal networks or sanction groups or actors fueling conflict. And we've seen more focused national actions, high-level conversations at the United Nations and other multilateral fora. But this attention comes from a reason: organized crime and armed violence are the rise globally. According to the 2023 Global Organized Crime Index, over 82% of the world's population now lives in countries experiencing high levels of criminality. And as arms transfers increases in many of these regions, so do the risk. Diversion fuels insecurity, empowers armed groups and criminal networks, and weakens legitimate law enforcement and really undermines the governance. And corruption is a key enabler in all this. For too long, corruption has been a missing piece in how we think about arms diversion. It's often acknowledged, but rarely prioritized, either in policy or in risk assessments. Yet some of the most famous arms trafficking scandals over the last 2 decades were rooted in corruption. These started to change after NATO's experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq, where military leaders and policymakers realized that corruption, not just insurgencies, was the main reason weapons were being diverted. So in response to this, we've seen some positive developments at international level, but let's be clear, while momentum is building, efforts to prevent corruption, fuel diversion are still in the early stages. And too often we lack the data, the tools, the political will. That's where this new report comes in. Under the Radar shows not only the scale of the problem, but specific patterns and weaknesses that allow corruption to thrive. So how is today's session going to work? You know the drill. We have 5 fantastic speakers lined up. We'll start with a short overview of the report and with the key findings. Then we'll hear concrete case and examples from Colombia, Norway, and Serbia, followed by a discussion on how we can strengthen state-level risk assessments. Each speaker will have 5 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So please do use the Q&A function to share your thoughts, reflections, or inquiries, and I will wrap us up at the end. So with that, let me start and turn into Colby Goodman to give us an overview of the report findings. Colby is a senior researcher at Transparency International U.S. and Transparency International Defense and Security. And he focuses on the links between corruption and the global arms trade. Colby.
Thanks so much, Ara. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see some of the people in the audience. I think one of the most compelling quotes from the global war on terror days in connection with corruption-fueled arms diversion is from retired General John Allen. He was the former commando of NATO International Security Force. And he said to a U.S. Senate subcommittee that for too long we focus our attention solely on the Taliban as the existential threat to Afghanistan, but they are an annoyance compared to the scope and the magnitude of corruption. The U.S. and other Western governments have struggled with corruption-fueled diversion, and other countries, of course, including Colombia, Iraq, Mali, Somalia, and Yemen. These are some of the reasons why U.S. and other governments started exploring corruption risk assessments of foreign partners to evaluate proposed arms sales and military training, starting in the late 2010s and then more recently. However, these stages are still in their infant, and it's hampered by a lack of understanding of what types of corruption risk government should assess and how they should assess them, and then what do they do. In response, my co-author, Michael Picard, and I started a study a couple years ago to find new insights into this problem. And some of the questions we looked at were, what are the most common types of corruption risks? Who's involved in these schemes? And then what are the institutional gaps that might be facilitating these diversion schemes? So I'd be curious to know if you can predict some of these. So I'm going to share the screen. And pull up slides for you. If I can do it correctly. Okay, so first slide I have for you is so Michael identified over 400 cases of corruption-fueled diversion across 70 countries, mostly within the last 7 to 8 years. These cases were identified with the help of Halo Trust Small Arms and Light Weapons database, and with our sort of extensive search for more cases, including larger weapons. As you can see, there are significant number of cases in Latin America. There were about 89 cases in sub-Saharan Africa. Each case includes one or more actor that allegedly or actually was involved in corruption and arms diversion schemes. Some cases involve multiple instances of corruption. To verify the legitimacy of these cases, we also consulted with experts from 24 different countries. Importantly, the map is not just a bunch of dots. It exposes a troubling reality. Over 500 military and police officials turned their back on their country, trading safety for a payday and selling out national or global security for the shine of easy money. So, do you know what the most common type of corruption connected with arms diversion is? Embezzlement. So, and when I say embezzlement, what I mean is government officials, such as military or police personnel, stealing or embezzling government-owned weapons and then selling them to unauthorized users for private profit. There were a total of 366 cases of embezzlement across all life cycle stages of a weapon, from production to disposal, with active use and storage the most prominent. Perhaps surprisingly, 82 of the embezzlement cases involved higher levels of corruption, with mid and high level government personnel. And many of these cases, these high level cases, involved large volumes of weapons. My co-author highlighted a recent case in Just Security in which a group of Dominican Republican police officers, including several senior officers, allegedly stole almost 1 million rounds of ammunition and sold it on the black market. Some of this ammunition was then found with armed gangs in Haiti. These findings strongly emphasize that both arms exporters and importers need to pay more attention to the risk of embezzlement, both for new and older weapons. So the next type of corruption that was not as prominent but still important with bribery and abuse of authority. So private arms brokers, criminals, or smugglers allegedly used bribery in at least 37 of the corruption fuel diversion cases around the world, making so these bribery schemes were employed most often for the diversion of weapons across international borders, such as smuggling, or to illicitly acquire civilian gun permits domestically. In one case from last year, Paraguayan authorities arrested several senior officials, mostly from the defense ministry's importing agency, for allegedly receiving bribes from an auto parts company to allow the import of weapons that were then trafficked to criminal gangs in Paraguay and Brazil. Police personnel were the most common type of recipients of these bribes, followed by officials from the military, and then offices that approve licenses for the import or export of arms or for the domestic purchase of firearms. Um, um, I think it's also important to talk about the impacts. Many of the corruption fuel diversion cases resulted in devastating impacts on civilians and military and police personnel. Some of the key impacts include empowering criminal networks, increasing armed conflict, eroding political rights, and reducing military effectiveness. While these impacts are relatively common to arms diversion, sometimes some of the side effects of corruption fuel diversion are unique, sometimes creating a vicious cycle of instability that can imperil entire communities. The first quote I have here is from the former defense minister of Kazakhstan. In response to a question, he alleged that people in charge of the arms depots purposely kept the depots in poor storage conditions to obscure illicit sales of artillery rockets. And these conditions led to explosion. And one incident in Aries in 2019, explosion resulted in 3 deaths, 160 injuries, and the evacuation of 44,000 residents. The second quote reflects some of the challenges of reporting and stopping corruption fuel diversion. This diversion not only arms criminals, it can lead to poor police morale and military ineffectiveness. These findings are a flashing red light. Arms exporters and importers must not treat corruption fuel diversion solely as a governance or development problem. It's a central threat to peace and security. Thank you. Back to you, Iris.
It's like beginners. I'm not unmuting myself. Thank you so much, Colby. Let me just turn to Mario Blanco, project manager and anti-corruption expert from Transparency International Colombia, who will bring some of the examples in his country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ara. Good morning for everyone, or good afternoon. Okay, Colombia is a country with conditions that are highly favorable for the diversion of weapons due to its ongoing armed conflict, the presence of organized criminal groups, and its geographical location as a bridge between North and Central and South America. These factors are intensified by the traditional institutional weaknesses and weak anti-corruption efforts. Obviously, these have social issues that facilitate the symbiosis between corruption and crime. Then, I would like to highlight 3 cases in which arms diversion was fueled by corruption in Colombia. The first case, referenced in the report, involves charges filed by the Attorney General's office against 2 army sergeants accused of diverting weapons and ammunition from military armories in Medellin in 2021 and 2022. Both have denied charges. One sergeant was accused of systematically diverting rifles, ammunition, and US-made M249 light machine gun. The other one allegedly helped divert 28,000 rounds of ammunition from an armory under his supervision by falsifying inventory records. Prosecutors also claimed that both men were later transferred to other battalions, but they are believed to have continued diverting military equipment and engaging engaging in illegal activities. So this is a problem that continues, and the sanction is very low here in Colombia. The second and third cases can be found in the website of justsecurity.org. So the second one highlights how senior personnel often cover their involvement by threatening, punishing, or framing low-ranking soldiers, as reportedly occurred with the accused national police officers. In 2023, a former Colombian Army sergeant who managed a unit's armory described an alleged intimidation campaign after he refused to join his commander's arms trafficking network. The ex-soldier claimed that after he declined a $20,000 bribe, his superiors discharged him, fired him, and apparently attempted to have him killed. This shows the problems of security that the officers and soldiers confront here in Colombia. The third case involves the use of privileged access to internal systems to falsify storage records. A 2023 state investigation alleged that a group of Army personnel systematically falsified both digital and paper records to divert over 2,000 grenades and 100,000 rounds of ammunition from a brigade here in Colombia. So this is a problem that exacerbates the violence here in Colombia. And the continued influence of criminal groups on the state institutions, not only the army, as well as the weakening of government entities, led us to refer to what we at Transparencia por Colombia, TI Colombia, describe as a process of some symbiotic relationship. I'm going to share my screen just to show you one slide. Yeah. Okay. In this dynamic, institutions are affected through means such as bribery, the use of violence, or other forms of corruption. And in turn, the institutions enable criminal operations as arms diversion by providing benefits, avoiding sanctions, and thereby strengthening illegal actors who continue to influence the states. What all of these lead us? Ultimately, to institutions become further weakened due to corruption, while illegal actors gain greater capacity to use corruption as a means to undermine state. Naturally, this has a negative consequence in violence and ineffective military forces that now have to confront more powerful criminal groups. This is not only for arms diversion, but also for drug trafficking or illegal mining, etc. This is a critical situation and a vicious cycle that must be urgently broken in order to overcome the problem. Now I want to present three of the main challenges that Colombia is facing. Let me stop the slide. The first challenge that Colombia has is the high level of discretion and opacity in the defense sector procurement. In Colombia, there are legal frameworks that, as exceptions to the general rules governing public administrations, allow the military forces to withhold information without providing much justification. This includes contract-related information. In some cases, it's necessary to obtain court orders to access the information about military operations and purchases, which significantly limits public oversight and even state-level institutional control, not only by the society, but also state control. This is a really difficult situation here in Colombia. The second challenge is the excessive decentralizations and rigid hierarchy in decision-making, which results in each military unit operating in remote area of Colombia as an isolated cluster with limited oversight and high discretionary power at the local level. This issue is further exacerbated by the fact that Colombia's territory is vast, difficult to access, and largely covered by jungle, making it very challenging to monitor activities in these regions. This situation, marked by a high level of discretion in decision-making, the concentration of power in the hands of local personnel, limited institutional oversight from central authorities, and poor inventory management in the territories creates the perfect breeding ground for corruption. The diversion of weapons is no exception, but also corruption related to drug trafficking, illegal mining, etc., as I said before. As an example, here in Colombia, we conducted a research where military informed us that some personnel were seizing fuel used to produce cocaine, which were then resold to criminal groups with little or no oversight. This was possible due to the absence of high quality inventories or just inventories of seized goods and obviously weak auditing processes. So that's all for me by now. Ara, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mario, for highlighting those cases in Colombia and the challenges, the ongoing challenges that you are capturing. And now turn to our Norwegian example, Mr. Kire Knudsen from the Ministry of Defense of Norway, who's going to give us an example of a recent case and why it's important to think about anti-corruption and diversion together in arms exports. Kire, please.
Thank you very much, Ara, and good morning to all of you in the Western Hemisphere, and good afternoon to us here on the European side. I'm Kire Knudsen again. I've been working for the Norwegian government almost 3 decades, and for the last 10 years, I've specialized in good governance and anti-corruption issues, also with the Center for Integrity in the defense sector, and we're working quite a bit engaged with NATO, as NATO increasingly views corruption as both a security risk and a security threat. But today we're going to dig a little bit into what we label as the boat sales going horribly wrong, which was a case about a decade ago in 2015. How could a Norwegian auxiliary naval ship and 6 fast patrol boats end up with a Nigerian warlord? And this was back in, and at the time we were still trying to reduce our armed forces and also our Navy. Back 15 years ago, the Norwegian Navy auxiliary vessel called KNM Horten was being prepared for sale on the open market, and it had to be demilitarized before sale. It was then transferred to a civilian yard back in 2010. Then in 2011, it was sold off to a company named Clear Ocean, but that contract was canceled due to information that there were rumors that then the ship would go to Somalia for security purposes, and hence this was not in line with rules and regulations, obviously. Then in 2012, it was sold off to a company called Gas Global, and subsequently the ship left Norway in 2014. So 2 years after that company had bought it. It was a well-known ship in Norway, and it did have an interesting. It was the major auxiliary, one of the largest ship in our Navy, and hence a newspaper, Dagbladet, one of the dailies in Oslo, really wanted to write a story about the fate of the ship and what will happen to it now that it has been decommissioned. And this initiated an investigative journalist really to get into swing of things, leading to several interesting findings in what become ship sales gone horribly wrong. It turned out that the CAS Global had a very complicated structure of ownership and had ties, among other things, to French mercenary company selling security solutions. And on request from the journalist to the Norwegian Defense Logistics Organization on what this company really was all about. It was believed that the company was a British oil offshore enterprise with a global focus. But then it turned out, and down the road also, that the CAS Global also had bought 6 other decommissioned Norwegian warships, fast patrol boats, all being demilitarized before sale. And half a year later, about 6 months later, after sort of searching all over, the journalist found that the vessels, all 7 of them, were in Lagos, Nigeria. So these 7 naval vessels were in reality bought by a local warlord in Nigeria named Tompolo Expomolo, who had won a contract with Nigerian authorities. It was stated at the time, a contract with Nigerian authorities to keep security in Nigerian coastal waters. So obviously, to make a long story short, this resulted in a major wash-up afterwards, and the officer responsible for the sales and who had taken advantage of his position by getting transfers from the company, from CAS Global, up to 900,000 Norwegian kroners, about $90,000 or euros, to his private bank account. He had been selling off military equipment to illegal customers in Africa through a front company, illegal. Admitted theft of a propeller and shaft, and partial guilt for theft of ship cradles as well, unlawful again. He was also accused of benefiting from private use of military equipment like off-road vehicles. So there was a whole range of things that went on. And so the officer in question, he was convicted of serious corruption, embezzlement, the issue of the theme of the day, and illegal military export. So he was sentenced to, at the time, 4 years and 8 months in prison, and to pay a sum of 4.1 million kroners, which is about 400,000 euros, in compensation to the Norwegian state. So, but what were some of the outcome of all of this? And let me be brief, since time is short here. But so, what were some of the results we would see? New export rules, obviously, were implemented. Also, there were measures taken to ensure that all sales of military equipment would be conducted with transparency, full transparency, and through legitimate channels only. There was also efforts undertaken to strengthening the verification processes for buyers to prevent sales to unauthorized entities, obviously. Also, efforts to enhance the monitoring and more regular auditing of military equipment sales to ensure compliance with all different export control laws, another area that had been violated and breached. And there was also a major reorganization of the whole defense procurement system in Norway, in which we established a new agency called NDMA, Norwegian Defense Material Agency, that saw the light of day back in 2016. So military material not to be sold off for exporting as civilian material, obviously, was another issue. So then this is sort of a brief run through all of it, but it raises obviously a number of different questions that could be discussed during the Q&A, and I just ask some of them, clearly questions we've been pondering and that could come up for discussion. And certainly, was it in this case more important to sell for a good price than to follow the rule? That question could be asked. Was there a culture in the system at the time where urgency really mattered more than anything, and perhaps mattered most of all? That's another interesting issue that could be addressed, and it's probably universally applicable also with the other presenters here today. Another question: was there too much responsibility put on too few people? That could probably also be the case. And why did it take so long after the fact really to fix the problem as it arose, which is another problem. Did the Navy commander, the one convicted, did he end up as a scapegoat? Or did this really reveal a larger systemic failure? Perhaps a bit of a more complicated and a more difficult question to ask off the table, but certainly another issue. And why did not people higher up in the, that's a very central issue. Why did not people higher up in the system really understand what was going on? And how did this case harm the reputation of the armed forces in our country and the Ministry of Defense, which it obviously did? So, and in conclusion, sort of last point, were the boat sales itself a corruption case, or were there suboptimal control mechanisms really to blame? Why was it possible for the officer to take advantage of his position when stealing material that had nothing really to do with the ships, which he did also? So I guess my time runs out, Ara. That was some introductory remarks. Pass it on back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those questions. I can see that is one question in the Q&A. I invite those attending and listening to the panel to write down the thoughts, insights, and queries in the Q&A and chat. And now I'm moving to Sasha Dragolja. He's a Serbian investigative journalist that covers, among other things, arms trade and the corruption in the defense sector.
Thank you, Ara. Thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar. So it was really interesting to hear my previous colleagues regarding Serbia. I think that this report uses one term. It's kleptocracy, and I think that term really describes the situation in Serbia when it comes to this topic. So basically, in Serbia, these kind of corruption cases are not accidents or incidents at all. They are systematically created. Basically, Serbian arms industry plays a significant role in the battlefields all over the world, and sometimes used a lot in different proxy wars. So in that case, Serbian political elites actually are using the arms industries in order to gain geopolitical points and also to earn a lot of money. So basically, our current government, which is here in power for more than a decade, basically when they came to power, they practically took over the whole sector with their own people. So when we talk about corruption cases, if you ask the Serbian authorities, there are none. Although Serbian investigative journalists and also some of the rare institutions, Serbian auditing institution, have emphasized a lot of cases when there was the damage to the state-owned companies have been done by private merchants. So basically, in Serbia, we have more such a corruption than the version of arms to the direct criminals. There is one really important case, and I will talk about it later. But first of all, this state corruption and installed systematic corruption is the main point. This corruption goes at the cost of the Serbian taxpayers, but also for the stability all over the world where those weapons are being diverted. There is a symbol for this kind of situation in Serbia is one particular arms merchant called Slobodan Tešić. He was blacklisted by UN from 2003 until 2013. At that point, Serbian ruling party, Serbian Progressive Party, came to power, and then Mr. Tešić has not been anymore at the UN blacklist. Also, he was being established as the main guy in the whole arms trade industry, although he doesn't have any official position. During the years, me and my colleagues did a lot of stories about this kind of situation. Other thing is impunity. In rare cases when journalists discover corruption, such as father of interior minister who is actually in charge for giving one part of the permissions for arms export. He was actually creating a new company that was buying weapons from Serbian state companies for preferential prices. So all these corruption cases never went to court, and the whistleblowers and the police officers who were investigating these people close to the ruling party, actually they were sanctioned in different kind of ways. So in that regards, Serbian weapons have ended up in multiple battlefields all over the world where it should not happen, and it was used against civilians or protesters in Nigeria, in Sudan, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, even in Myanmar after the 2021 coup. With that regards, situation in Serbia is quite systematically organized. And it's really interesting to mention because Slobodan Tešić, the arms merchant I mentioned, who is practically coordinating all of the arms trade in the country. His companies are making larger profits than state-owned companies. Actually, he is blacklisted by United States of America 2017, and also 3 years ago by the UK government. But somehow Mr. Tešić has made it to export arms to both of those countries, although he's on the sanction list using proxy companies. Me and my colleagues, we published several stories on this, but the United States government and the UK government were not really interested in looking at this because of the current geopolitical situation and the interests that says that Serbian arms are welcomed on some territories. This kind of large-scale corruption, which is really important for the global scale. But there is also one interesting case which also comes from this kind of kleptocracy, and that is the incident in 2023 in Kosovo. As some may know, Serbia and Kosovo have still disputed issues over territory after the war in the 90s. And in October 2023, a group of Serb paramilitaries led by Milan Radojičić, who is a highly influential figure in Serbia. He is a vice president of the Kosovo Serbs party. He's a very successful businessman who works for the state, actually constructing roads, and he has a really clear criminal background. That guy actually led a group of Serbs that killed actually a Kosovo policeman. This was the major affair, not just in Serbia and Kosovo, but the whole Balkans, in Europe, because people were afraid that it's going to escalate in a large conflict. And our investigation, me and my colleagues, we take a look in the weapons that was seized from Radojić's group later on. And what we revealed was astonishing, that assault rifle bullets the group has used were produced almost less than a year before the conflict. So that means that someone from the state companies have given it to Radojičić, or the private merchants who bought those weapons have diverted it to Radojić's criminal group. Third option is it was being stolen from the warehouses. So we tried to figure out what happened, and Serbian government denied our request, saying it's strictly confidential. This shows that the whole situation is fully systematic. Mr. Radojičić is questioned regarding this act. He admitted it, but he was never arrested. He's now walking free for years in Serbia. This situation in Serbia is practically, it's not really easy for organizations who are giving some kind of proposal how to solve this, because this is not like some incidents in the system which needs to be fixed. This is a highly political thing that goes from the top down. And in that situation, I'm really looking forward to discussion to see what are some other examples, or there are any issues I can clarify with this regards.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I can see the chat building up with questions. So I'm going to move to our next speaker, is Sarah Dessner. She's an independent consultant and researcher who focuses on security sector governance and reform. And she might be able to give some answers to some of the questions about how do we mitigate, how do we address these concerns. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ara, but no pressure. Anyway, I think the obvious question here, given the risks that Colby and others have laid out, is why don't we already have some of these corruption mitigation systems? And I have worked on some past efforts to develop these systems, so I'm well positioned to discuss both the obstacles that we found to their effective use and also what I think we need to do better. So an overarching challenge that we have here is understanding where in the arms transfer decision-making process there are openings for corruption risk assessment to actually impact decision-making. And then targeting those openings with well-tailored tools, which don't necessarily exist. So the staff that are parsing most transfer requests in many countries at low levels are usually under immense pressure from above to adjudicate these transfers quickly. And they're absolutely not given the training necessary to identify corruption-related diversion risks, I think to an extent that people don't understand. They're also not given guidance about what specifically they can do when the risk is identified. Not what the country should do, what can they specifically do? So overall, throughout the system, there's a vague sense that somebody else is or will be taking care of corruption risk assessment at some other point in the process. But that someone else doesn't actually exist. So in-depth country assessments are unfortunately not a realistic option here at that level, though they're incredibly important for showing us what can go wrong. So to get these sort of lower and mid-level actors to engage in risk assessment, I'm a strong believer in the triage system. This means helping transfer implementers quickly identify the highest risks transfer partners and types of transfers, and so that the very little bandwidth that they have available for deeper analysis and potentially reconsidering a transfer, or at least applying mitigation measures, is spent where it's most needed. The quickest and easiest way to identify the highest risk transfers partners is with off-the-shelf third-party data. And that's frankly what there's bandwidth for. The gold standard here is the TI Global Defense Integrity Index. I have to give TI a shout out here for an amazing product. Unfortunately, resource constrained as we all are, this index doesn't cover all partners of interest, and it can't be refreshed very frequently. However, as I say all the time, and I think some of these other speakers have given us some insight into, given very low security sector transparency and oversight as just a general global rule, whatever general corruption you find in a country, corruption in the security sector is invariably worse. Therefore, overall levels of government corruption and other corruption indicators are a workable, though imperfect, proxy for relative level of security sector corruption in a state. If corruption is endemic in a state, it's worse in the security sector. Once a particular partner is identified as high risk, the next challenge is getting transfer implementers to understand how different types of partner institutional weakness and different types of transfers pose different risks. And that's why I'm so glad that we had some people here to talk about the specific risks, say in Colombia, because these things are not the same everywhere. The institutional weakness part tends to be the most difficult to get across. Implementers will usually assume that a partner's institution runs like their own when they're not specifically prompted with examples of how, for instance, human resource systems can be twisted to reinforce corrupt networks. People are just not looking for these things and they're not thinking about them. Ideally, this would be done at the workforce education level, and I do hope we see more of that in the future. Often corruption risk failures of the past are not taught. I think a good diagnostic for any country conducting arm transfers would be to see how many of its day-to-day implementers can name any past diversion failures and discuss the causes and consequences at all. I think fewer would be able to than we might think. In the meantime, while Colby's report and the others does a fantastic job identifying corruption risk tied to both institutional weakness and particular types of transfers, again, for the sake of bandwidth, it's necessary to produce a radically simplified typology. For example, a list of simple questions that illuminate points where corruption might most easily enter into a transfer process. And I have to say, this is going to seem very obvious to the people on this call, but this is really where we are. Getting people in this process to ask, how is the procurement process run? Will there be a need for sustainment contracts, sustainment budgets? And do we need to have a look at that? Is the transferred item particularly physically easy to smuggle or in demand? And this is a favorite of mine for how often it's neglected. How long is the usable lifespan of a transferred item? How plausible is it that we, whoever we is, will still have a good relationship with the partner over the course of that lifespan? These questions are just not being asked. And if we can get to that basic point, we would be getting somewhere. It's vitally important to highlight that once a risk is identified, transfer implementers often have no idea what to do about that risk. Stopping or even slowing down a transfer is, I have to be honest here, viable only in a small number of cases, and it's usually costly in political capital. And this is where I think the NGO scholarly community needs to step up. We need to develop a list of mitigation strategies that are appropriate for different types of corruption risk. And those mitigation strategies have to be tailored to what transfer implementers can realistically push for in their various positions. We all know the larger changes we'd like to see, and we need to work toward those. But if we want to see more immediate change, we've got to give people at those lower and mid-level tools. My personal experience when confronted with this task was to realize that I didn't understand the transfer system and the roles of various implementers as well as I thought. And I have heard that from other people as well. I was unprepared to offer realistic and specific mitigation measures for specific risks off the shelf, which is really what's needed. And I hope we can work on that. One of the many ways in which this report is valuable is that it allows us to reverse engineer many of the corruption diversion risk cases explored. I'm sure some thoughts came to people as they were listening to some of the specific cases. And with that reverse engineering, we can think about what specific mitigation measures at that process stage might have prevented or at least reduced diversion earlier on in the process. One final thought, which is just sort of a question for the audience and for discussion, I think. One conundrum I haven't yet been able to crack. Many arms transfer decision makers understandably don't like to have their options limited. You will find if you're ever working with government actors in this space that any suggestion that a corruption risk assessment might be prescriptive, might for sure say we can or can't do this, you encounter a massive amount of pushback. That's understandable. And there are usually ways to say this can be overridden for various national security strategies. National security goals. However, I think that something that gets lost there is even the process of doing that kind of override, saying that we're willing to take this risk in this case, creates a paper trail that people are very uncomfortable with. That is something that we can't necessarily deal with these lower and mid-level mitigation measures, as important as they are. That kind of thing can only be overridden with massive political will, as I believe it was to some extent in the Norwegian case. So we have to work at both the higher level and the lower level at the same time, and I can't wait to hear what comes out in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sarah. See, I think all the panelists have put lots of questions for discussion. And so I think we can all agree that this is a conversation starter, and we need to do more of this and more of these discussions. I'm gonna move to the questions that our audience are posing. So we have a couple. We have one question for Colby. That is from Hema Chandra Basapa. Can we get the arms exporters to ensure that whatever weapons that they send to any country, that this information is available in the public media to ensure that to eliminate this corruption? Does your study have any information as to where the ammunition goes to outside the country to which the weapons were sent? Colby, I don't know if you can pick this question?
Great, thanks, Ara. Well, the short answer is no. I can't tell you where all the ammunition goes, but there are sources out there, and there are studies, and some countries are relatively good about providing information on arms exports. And then you can, through UN Comtrade and others, you can see imports. So it is possible to do some triangulation of data to find some of the information you're looking for. But there, I mean, in general, transparency, needs to be a lot of push for an increase in transparency. And I mean, we highlight in the report that there are specific examples in which there was some transparency provided, and that allowed investigators in the country or outside to then trace back sort of corruption fueled diversion and then give it to a government official, and then they were able to curb it, right? So it's not just sort of like this pie, like, oh, this would be great to have. Like, it actually has direct consequences in preventing diversion of weapons, right? So we also have talked, and some of the pushback to this is that there are security concerns or there are company confidential concerns, but a lot of these can be quickly sort of addressed. So I don't that's what I'd say about transparency.
And Colby, there is another question about Nigeria and asking for specific the number of cases that you observe in Nigeria, and I think there is an opportunity to follow up with our colleagues there.
Yeah.
Did you see that question? Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks, Ara. I mean, it's great to have so much interest in Nigeria, and there's some, Transparency International Nigeria has been doing some amazing work. And so I think folks that are interested in engaging with Nigeria, contact them. We have 17 cases of corruption fuel diversion in Nigeria. It's not, I mean, I think we didn't do a study to try to figure out all the cases in the world of corruption fuel diversion. We tried to get a big sample to have a better understanding of how it all works, right? So that doesn't mean, so it's very possible, but there could be more than 17 cases in the last 8 years. But these cases are, related to what Kiri was talking about. You have bribery and smuggling across borders. You have embezzlement, police embezzlement of firearms. It sort of runs the gamut of the different types of cases, right? So, yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions that they're really addressing the current state of the geopolitics and the global risk. And I wonder, so there's one question from Mohammed Moka from MAD for Peace. On how has corruption influenced the flow and oversight of arms transfers to Ukraine, and what mechanisms are in place to ensure accountability and prevent the diversion of weapons? And I wonder if I can cluster this question with Francois Valerian question on what is what we are seeing in the world right now with the geopolitics and the current context. Is that increasing corruption levels in the arms trade, or is just not a clear impact? And I wonder if I can, Sasha, if you want to talk about these issues, maybe with the proximity, regional proximity.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this topic, these questions that were asked are questions that are becoming important in the Serbian context, because actually Serbia has been one of the important providers of arms to Ukraine. But here is the catch: it's not directly. So Serbia didn't sold a bullet to Ukraine, because Serbia is in a position to balancing between East and West and have good ties with Russia. So Serbia did not impose sanctions to Russia, but on the other hand, it sells hundreds of millions of euros worth arms and ammunition to Ukraine. But it does it to third parties. So this is the question of the end certificate. Serbian authorities always say we never sold anything to Ukraine because we have end user certificates and it's bought by that country. But the other countries are thinking that the Ukraine issue is prompt issue and the rules are not really important in this situation. So one of the major persons who are involved in this trade is Slobodan Tešić, the guy I mentioned previously. And because Serbia now exports a lot of ammunition to U.S. allegedly, and UK, that is being done by his proxy companies. So we have clear situation that person who is labeled for corruption is now one of the major suppliers for Ukraine. And many other media, US media, have wrote about Ukrainian controversial persons in the Ukrainian context that are being sent all over the place to broker this kind of arms deal, in Bulgaria as well. So I think when there is a war, there is effectiveness and speed becomes urgent, and people don't really look on the standards, on the rules, or the corruption. Corruption can even be seen as a good thing because it fastens it up, it smooths things up. So this is a really good question, and I think that is as I see it. I don't think it's going to be worse because it was already bad. So it's hard to say what's going to be happen in the future, but I think you're completely right that the Ukrainian context has increased the corruption because we know that all the people, intermediates, are really shady persons, not just in Serbia, but in the other countries.
Thank you so much. There are two questions in the chat on the Norwegian case. One, I think, is to follow up with recommendations and support. The other one reads, the naval ships were sold or exported through or with the permission of the government of Norway. Will it help if the government places restrictions on the transfer of these naval boats to a third party? Kiri, I wonder if you can answer to that question.
Yes, certainly, and hello again. Yeah, certainly, and hello again. And to the latter question, obviously the question is yes. And the thing is, how could this really happen without really people higher up in the system, or even the system itself, really knowing what's going on? And that's really where sort of a point of departure for this whole thing. But the longer question here really raises, and I can quickly go through sort of the 6 main things we had to do really in order to move on and to learn from this very process. And as always, and within the field that we are concerned with, it always starts with transparency and openness. Everything you can do out in the open, you can virtually do anything under the sun, really, if you do it with openness and you do it transparent. Especially in the defense area, since so much is based on secrecy and so much is based on a lot of money. That is not to say that this very defense sector is any worse than any other, but the idea is that risk of corruption is much higher there than many other places, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it's any worse in itself than many others. But the risk obviously is very high, and we are concerned with risks. So sort of so some of the main points here was certainly doing it out in the open with transparency and through all legitimate channels. That's the first one. The second one is the implementation of new export rules. In my country, it's the Foreign Office that runs the export control, but obviously we had to go through the rules and the laws and everything for export. Then the third one, obviously, is also another important one, is to strengthen the verification processes for all buyers, really to prevent sales to unauthorized entities. That obviously much better checkup on each and every buyer. The next one, the fourth one, really is enhancing the monitoring and more regular auditing of military equipment sales to ensure compliance and compliance with all export laws. Obviously, is important. The fifth one, and we went rather thorough here, was that we made a whole new agency restructure of the material and acquisition organization within our sector, and altogether made a new agency. So then we could measure today whether that has been successful or not. At least we implemented tremendous or large changes in a new agency. And then the last one, obviously, to keep military and civilian material separate. Once military, always military. So I guess those are the main findings, Ara, and I hope that answers the question and takes us further into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We need to wrap up this conversation. I want to do it. So this is what we heard today. So we heard of the new report that I hope everybody is going to find and read, that gives us a typology of corruption and really brings data and cases of 400 cases. We heard about the complexities, power dynamics, and obscurity, and the privilege in Colombian cases. We heard of a good case study from Norway and lots of food for thoughts that our panelists has thrown at us. We heard the experiences of Serbian and the dangers and the cases on the carving activities of UN sanctioned arms brokers. And we have some really first-hand ideas and challenges that Sarah has sent at us. So I would like to wrap up with some hope. One of the questions was talking about hope. What is the hope for end this corruption? And if you could go, maybe starting with you, Colby, how do we mitigate this? What is the hope? How do we move from here?
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, always end with hope. I mean, I think that the great thing is there's a lot of people, there's a lot of governments, there's a lot of both from the right and the left that recognize that this is a problem, including the Republican chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we're also, what TI is doing, what others are doing, is to really understand the links between corruption and arms diversion and figure, like, within institutions, what the major gaps are and how those are facilitating and motivating corruption field diversion. And in our report, we go into much more detail. Kiri mentioned sort of audits, stockpile security, like who's in charge, how many people are in charge, record like sort of record keeping practices, super important, promotions and military and promotion salary, those are all super important. If I can just say that I think with this increased knowledge, and of course more work needs to be done, we can create smart and efficient strategies to stem this. We just need the will to sort of engagement to do, and I think we got to keep pushing. And in connection with the sort of what's happening now, I think there is such a push to do things rapidly and quickly, but we can balance those two. It's possible, so that we create sort of not only sort of reduce our vulnerability, but create more secure and prosperity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mario, give us some hope.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say that in a context where opacity is assumed to support the work of the military forces, I mean, if the diversion of weapons strengthens criminal groups, transparency can have a weakening effect in the process of combating the criminal groups. So the transparency is a tool to combat the criminal groups, especially here in Colombia. Also, I want to say that the reporting is the first tool that should be addressed in every country. It's necessary to facilitate the detection of corruption cases. To achieve this, for the case of Colombia, it's urgent to address the undue pressure that some officers exert on their subordinates. This creates a climate of fear and discourages the reporting. Here in Colombia, we have a lot of abuses from the officers. The undue influence to prevent complaints, to pressure soldiers to make decisions that go against the mission of the forces, the sanctions, illegal sanctions like transfers to high-risk areas of Colombia or assigning personnel to dangerous positions during the combat. And this reinforces the fear and silence. So the hope is the transparency as a tool for combating criminal groups, and also reinforcing the whistleblowers protection and whistleblowers tools. I think that's all for to answer your question.
Very good tools. Kiran, you have some words of hope. What do you think we can do?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think
yes, already.
I think Colby, I mean, he started mentioning the very important thing, really, that we understand the nature of corruption and its manifestations. What does corruption, what does it really mean? What does embezzlement constitute? What is an integrity breach, and so forth? We have to understand the consequences for society, the consequence for companies, for institutions, but also for individuals, the dire consequences it holds. And most organizations really should draft an anti-corruption policy, really, because prevention is key within our area. Really, prevention is key. And also more locally, set up integrity plans. What are the ethics? What's the morale and the issues within a given organization? And put that into an integrity plan to see how things work. And that being said, the very importance of training one's own staff and training staff regularly and rather rigorously, rather than just subscribing to internet ISO standards or saying that in our culture there is absolutely no tolerance for corruption. That doesn't mean anything unless you really train your staff and you do it meticulously and they feel responsibility. Because we do know today that it's really the balance between, and that therein lies the hope, really the balance between trust on the one hand and control on the other. And in the old days, we used to have more control, and today it's more based on trust. But we know that we need to strike the right balance, because one cannot really exist without the other. And if you have too much of one of them rather than the other, you have a problem. And then lastly, what I often talk about when I'm fortunate to give a lecture or a speech somewhere, really is what we sort of the three pillars of society. The one on top where we have laws, all the anti-corruption laws, which virtually every country, every state on this globe really have anti-corruption laws. But it doesn't mean much if they don't have institutions that are sort of are built over time and that really enforce these laws with the vigor and seriousness. And certainly the third level, which always is the most important one, where we really need to be more hopeful and work harder, is really the mindset at the individual level. That each and every one, and we know that takes maybe a generation in some cases, 10, 20, 30 years to change the mindset of a culture, but that really is crucial, and that is where we have to begin. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sasha, you have 1 minute to give us hope. I don't know, we might have lost him. Sarah, can I go to you? What is the last, what would you give us as a key hope area solution?
I think, and I'm glad to follow Kyrie here, because I think he, gave us hope in general that we can spread to other cases, is some of the things that would be very helpful and reduce a lot of harm are not that difficult to do. There are horrible, intractable problems, but I have found that, again, with my focus on sort of lower and mid-level implementers here, people want to do better. There's a lot of room to do better. We're not asking people to do something incredibly complicated. They need to be given some political space to do it. They need to be given some basic tools. And I think we could actually see some improvement in some of the most obvious cases fairly quickly. And I will say that, you know, you see very clearly people want to do better when they're informed of these kind of things. Morale decreases pretty quickly when people consider what can I do and come up empty. But if we can give them something, you know, then we can start the ball rolling. And also to the culture change point, just as we're coming out, I think we all know in this field that there's a high tolerance for secrecy and, you know, we can't talk about this, national security and so on. And I'm hoping that that is changing to some extent. Because, you know, people need to be given a little bit of help and a little bit of external political support from civil society, from reporters, from so on, to do their jobs in the way that they would like to be doing them. So thank you so much.
Beautiful way of wrapping up. Thank you to everyone who has given us your morning or your afternoon, wherever you are. And as I said, this is a conversation started. There are many things, many questions thrown there to the air. So hopefully we'll see you in the next conversation. Bye. Thank you so much.